It is conscious and it's directed. So wellness is conscious and directed. Mhm. Self-directed. I'm seeing some comments in the chat. I just want to pause a bit about some participants not seeing the slideshow. Not sure. I could probably get the technical team on this. Rhonda, if you're in the room, you can let us know if
Yes,
it's, it's
yes, sorry, yes, we are checking. IT has responded to her, so you check on it and see.
okay. Okay, so
Okay.
it's not visible as yet. Okay.
She will, right, she's gonna check. So we see
Okay.
about this.
All right, no problem.
So we have responses, others are seeing it. So
Oh, others are seeing it. So it could be
okay.
very well
It might
on
be
their
just
side.
our system, so
Okay,
we'll
great.
see.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you guys. All right,
Mhm.
so I'll continue. So wellness is conscious and is self-directed. So the thing about wellness is that it is something that takes your responsibility, your personal responsibility. And I know that within the National Workplace Wellness Policy, we argue that there's a shared responsibility between employers and individuals. But that responsibility begins at the individual level. If you think about it, it is an active personal choice that you make to take care of your health and wellness. My grandmother always said, "There's nobody that is going to look after you than yourself, much better than you're going to look after yourself much better than anybody else. Whether you're in a marriage, a happy marriage, or you have children or what have you, it has to be something that's individually focused and centered. And I think because of the individual nature or the personal nature rather of wellness, the way you engage in wellness would typically look different from somebody else engaging in wellness. So wellness is not meant to be a copycat scenario. And it's not to say that you can look at what people are doing with respect to their health and wellness journey and learn from some of the patterns of behaviors that they have been embarking upon. But it, it tells us that we have to know for ourselves what will fit within with our schedule or fit within our profile. Okay. If you think about a person with diabetes and hypertension, their wellness journey is going to look quite different from someone who may have cancer or someone who has no disease that they're fighting or they're combating. All right. Someone who is much older in their 80s and 70s, their wellness journey is going to look different from somebody who's much younger in their 20s and 30s. Another critical part of the definition of wellness is the fact that it boasts a multidimensional and holistic nature to it. So outside of the physical and mental, wellness tackles a range of other dimensions from social, cultural, environmental. So we will actually spend some time talking about those dimensions because those are the corner pillars of the National Workplace Wellness Policy. There are actually 9 dimensions that underpin the policy. Okay. And of course, it because wellness is a process, it's proactive and not reactive, and it is dynamic. It changes over the life course of your life course or your lifetime. As I said, as you age, there are certain things that you would do differently than compared to what you were doing when you were much younger. So it's dynamic. It will constantly change. And of course, as science changes, or at least the results that science brings about change, we may have to make adaptations. Science will tell you you may need to take a little bit more vitamin E. Then there's other results that might tell you, but if you have a particular condition, you might not be able to take so much of this vitamin D. You may have to kind of supplement using this. If you're a vegan, for example, you have to be able to still get in your protein and getting your certain B plus B12 vitamins. So it's going to be changing. It's going to be dynamic. It's going to be different again according to the type of lifestyle that you have and the profile that you are actually owning. So I think best and most accessible distinctions between health and wellness is that health represents the state of well-being, And wellness is the state of living a healthy lifestyle. So one particular process is a kind of a static destination that you all want to arrive at. That's health, good health. But the journey, what is the state of living, the attitudes, the habits, okay, the behaviors that make up that healthy lifestyle, those now embody what we call wellness. So I think that's perhaps the best kind of representation of health and wellness as a distinction between the two that we can get. Okay, so all of this represents that theoretical background for the National Workplace Wellness Policy. Now, the National Workplace Wellness Policy was actually envisaged as a 10-year policy from 2019 to 2029. And it represents, as I said at the start, an effort or initiative that reflects a nationwide or national level multi-stakeholder commitment to safe, positive, and healthy workplaces. And there is that emphasis on multi-stakeholder because the same way that and I make these conversations very often, the same way that we would say the fight against crime and violence in this country cannot be reduced to the police services. It is not, it can't be reduced to government alone. It can't be reduced to communities alone. It can't be reduced to the private sector alone. It has to be something that falls within what I consider to be a whole of country approach. And wellness is no different in that particular regard. It has to take on this inter-entity relationship or arrangement. And I've made this point when the school nutrition policy actually came on stream here in Barbados. That, you know, with the school nutrition policy, if you read the policy carefully, the policy, even though it operates within or it applies within the school context, it requires the support and cooperation of parents, of those in the communities, in the private sector, the vendor communities. And that's in recognition is that you can have wellness within a school setting or health and wellness being well practiced within the school setting. But then when children go back home and they're going to household where you can eat as much as you want, you can eat whatever you want, you don't have to exercise, you can go on video games and play, and there's no physical activity in the household, then you're going to have that contradiction. And of course, the particular goals of the policy are not going to be fulfilled to the extent that it needs to be fulfilled because of those contradictions. So in the same vein, in a national workplace wellness policy, even though this is applied to the workplace, we recognize that yes, the workplace for many takes up a large chunk of our life or time, whether we are working an 8-hour day or 12-hour day, or even if you're working part-time. It is still critical that the policy has tentacles in other areas, other sectors, other spaces of society, the household, the schools, the communities, across the various spheres and of course, touching all cross section of Barbados is important. So, as I mentioned, the policy falls within a governance structure, and the governance structure is supported by a National Workplace Wellness Committee, as I said, is co-chaired by the Minister of Labour, Social Security and Third Sector, the Honorable Colin Jardine, and the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union, Tony Moore. And this committee has a makeup of different stakeholders from the private sector, community-based organizations, other ministries like Ministry of Health and Wellness, the employer sector, union sector, as we know. And what we do as a committee is to oversee the work activities involved in the implementation of workplace wellness, guided by the policy itself. And that work is operationalized by a special subcommittee, as I said earlier, known as the Promotions and Awareness for Workplace Wellness, which is a subcommittee that I chair, responsible for awareness and educational initiatives on the policy itself. And again, all of this started in 2022 when we revived or kind of resurrected the start of the implementation from 2019. And if you want to have a kind of a vision of what this particular structure would look like, if you imagine you have this national workplace wellness policy, and let me say, for those who haven't read the document, there will be resources, as I said, shared via email after this webinar, sometime today or tomorrow. We have all of your email addresses, so you will have a copy of the policy itself. So you have it in hand, and there are other guides that I created and a few others, and we will share those particular resources with you. So you will have all of the information beyond what you would learn from this webinar. Okay. But if you imagine that the National Workplace Wellness Policy sits as the kind of national instrument for wellness, and then you have workplaces, which are the primary stakeholders. So workplaces, in, as I said, within traditional and non-traditional spaces, online, remote, physical, and across different sectors. And the goal here is to allow the national workplace policy to be operationalized, okay, in a way that it will resemble the current state of needs within a given workplace. So one of the things that we didn't want to do is to have a national workplace wellness policy that says this is exactly how wellness should be practiced, and it becomes this kind of this authoritarian device that people think controls the boundaries of wellness programming in organizations. That's not what we wanted. We wanted a national workplace wellness policy, yes, that has a particular set of best practices and guidelines, but that those guidelines and best practices can be retrofitted within a particular workplace. Like, for example, you might be operating a small organization of 10 people. The way you operationalize the policy is going to probably be will probably look different from how a large organization with 200 and 300 people, 1,000 people, like a University of the West Indies, how they will operationalize it, and that would differ across sectors, hotels versus retail organizations like supermarkets or stores, you know. So it's going to obviously be it was written in such a way that it allows for those types of operationalizations that would reflect the culture and the structure and the makeup or the profile of the organization of interest. And I think it was important that the policy then serves a kind of as an umbrella instrument under which workplace wellness programs and programming in general can actually be guided within a best practice framework. Okay. So the policy underpins and supports the establishment then of wellness-related programs and initiatives at the lower levels, at the levels of organizations, even departments. People have been calling us, for example, and that's one of the other features of our remit as a subcommittee. You might not want, or you might not have the capacity to operationalize the national workplace wellness policy within the entire organization. You might have a department that has a special interest, and that department might be 20 people, 10 people, and you might, come to the subcommittee, or, and we have information, email addresses that you can reach us by, and we come in and we have a conversation, and we guide you, we hold your hand a bit to demonstrate how you can actually operationalize the policy. So it's not that you're just having at your disposal a policy without any guidance. The work of the committees is to allow for that implementation process to work smoothly and to kind of fit within your particular space, your reality. And it is important because I'm a big believer, a big exponent when it comes to effective implementation, because I've been saying this for years, that one thing that Barbados actually does very well, they love and they have the ability to put together nice, attractive, articulate, well explained policy documents. But the real work is the implementation. I've worked on several policies over the years. I've worked on the national policy for persons with disabilities only recently. I think that was finished last year. And part of that policy exercise was to kind of provide a space for how the policy is going to be implemented. And that's, I'm a big believer. When I write policies, I believe that every policy should always have a section to it, actual physical written section to the policy that speaks to how implementation should ensue. Because it's one thing to have a good looking policy or strategy, but it's another thing to have it implemented. And as I think that's where I always say that's where the devil resides. You know, we talk about the devil is in the detail. I say the devil is in the implementation. It's only when we implement that we start seeing a lot of cracks, a lot of things that we need to put in place. So that's why, again, these committees were set up, because we had to ensure that implementation was something that was not going to be the barrier to reaping the benefits behind this policy. So all individuals, all entities in various productive and economic sectors um, are all part of the stakeholder community in Barbados and even in the region. I've done some presentations in Antigua and St. Lucia already on this policy, because for me, I didn't want this policy to just be a policy for Barbados. Why is it that we can't have our sister um, territories in the EC and others, in other spaces in the Caribbean Sea, adopting something like this? Because the NCD crisis is not peculiar to Barbados at all. So these are the general goals. There's specific objectives in the policy, but if you had to think about if you had to pin down what are the two overarching goals, these are the two overarching goals here. To strategically and comprehensively guide. So the policy is a guidance framework. And that's something that when we started this process, the development process of the policy, we were clear to stress that the policy was not legislative. There's a difference between legislation and policy. Legislation provides certain mandates. Okay, so when you have the Safety and Health at Work Act, which is a piece of legislation that mandates the practice of health and safety within the workplace. That's one thing. Employers are held to account from a legislative perspective, because this is a requirement now that they have to follow. Now, a policy, on the other hand, does not spell out requirements or mandates. A policy's role is to support, to guide, to educate. And people get confused and say, but a policy has no teeth then, because I can have a policy and there's no particular requirement, there's no enforceability that we can have for policy. And that's understandable, because I understand that criticism. That's an important criticism. But policy and legislation then work together in that same vein. Because you can have all the legislation in the world, I can tell you this. And we've seen it. You can have all the legislation in the books. But the role of legislation is not to instruct or to guide. It's not there to educate. Legislation doesn't tell you how to implement, Legislation will say, well, you have to do this, you have to do that, you're required to do that. It is now for organizations now to put in their own policies, hence their own mechanisms to support implementation, to ensure that they're compliant with that legislation. So policy then allows for that alignment of organizations with legislation. I keep telling people it has a function in that way. It may not have the function that you want it to have to mandate people to do things, because in many cases there's a value in mandating or making requirements, but to mandate alone is not to guarantee results, because if that were the case, it means that we wouldn't have crime at all, because we do have laws on crime. We do have laws against crime in Barbados, but we know that the laws by themselves, as many people who go through the prosecution process, the court adjudication process when it comes to crime and so on, because of legislation, because people were able to prosecute because of evidence and keeping it consistent with what requires legislation is, doesn't mean that we solve the problem. We still need policies to support, to educate people, to get them away from a life of crime. So policies and legislation must work hand in hand. But policies alone, legislation alone, can't do the job. All right. So promoting and contributing extensively to the development of appropriate knowledge and skills and attitudes. So I think one of the key things I believe in is change management, or people call it behavioral change. The same way that we want behavioral change when it comes to criminal activity, whether it be at-risk youth, in terms of changing their mindset, changing their behaviors away from a life of crime. When it comes to wellness, it's the same thing. Because you can force somebody, you can say, but you know, I put a rule here that you should eat only this. At the end of the day, that person may have a particular attitude that is um is immune to change. That attitude is still there. The goal of the policy is to create an environment in which those attitudes, the development of skills, the development of knowledge can all take place. The changes in attitudes, all of those things can take place in a natural fashion that that person wants to and is willing to make the necessary changes to their living to support healthy um, lifestyles. So, as I said, midway in this presentation, the policy, the substantive areas of the policy are really within the 9 dimensions of wellness. And you're probably wondering, how did we arrive at these 9 dimensions? And this was based on both desk research that I did um, over the years from in the development process of the policy in 2015, 2016, 2017. We actually started with only a few dimensions at first. We had about 2 or 3 dimensions. Physical and mental wellness were very big dimensions, as you know, because they were well known, more so physical. And that was because the physical had a kind of a significant accent to it or emphasis to it because of the fact that a lot of the things, when you think about the diseases that we have in Barbados, especially from an NCD variety, were quite prominent and prevalent. But we recognize, but if we're going to if we're going to hold true to the definition of wellness as something that is multidimensional, we have to recognize that the individual is not simply the physical body, but the individual has a mind. So there's also the mental health and wellness component. The individual operates within a wider environment in the workplace. You know, there's still a physical environment in which that individual operates and interacts with. That environment has to be clean. It has to be safe. Okay? That individual operates within a social setting with co-workers who they need to communicate and have harmonious relationships with. So there's a social wellness side. That individual has an intellectual component to him or her. Okay, there's creativity, there's taking initiative, taking healthy risks. That's the intellectual side. And then we have the occupational side, which speaks to things like job satisfaction and morale. There's a spiritual side, there's a cultural side, and of course, there's a financial side. Okay, now we're going to go through each of these definitions here. As I said, I'm going to keep my eyes on the chat. I'm happy to see the comments coming through. So at some points, I will stop and probably refer to certain comments. I see Rosanna Lewis has a comment here. When we speak about holding employers being accountable regarding health and safety and wellness, it should also include qualified persons performing these roles. Too many employers have persons working in health and safety who are not qualified as they recognize health and wellness components. And that's a very critical point. And that's why one of the things about the policies, one of the tenets of the policies is to ensure that people who operate or who actually are appointed or assigned responsibility, that those people are trained and educated. Because, I mean, one of the things that we are hoping to build, hopefully by the end of this year, is a directory of health and wellness practitioners. And when I say health and wellness practitioners, I'm not talking about medical doctors. I'm talking about people who conduct this type of wellness programming, people who come to your organizations who have qualifications, they come in and they support those people in the organization in advocating and promoting wellness. Now, to be fair, there's a counterpoint in the sense that there's no guarantee that in any organization that, especially if you really care about wellness, that you're going to find an individual who's going to be proficient. And that would then suggest that the organization may need to have to outsource that support or consultant coming in to provide that guidance. But the goal is that over time, that is that weaning off process, that you can wean off, the organization can wean itself off of consultants, external support persons, to be able then to take a handle, to have a handle on the wellness journey where you have people who've been educated, they're trained, they might not have all of the qualifications in the world, but they're able to at least execute. All right. So it's very important. All right, so I want to talk about the individual dimensions. So I think all of us are familiar with what physical wellness is, and the fact that it represents the entire our physical body. If you think about the body, so particular thematic areas that would be critical to or germane to this area would be things like your exercise routine. And I have here exercise and activity because there's some cases where people might not be able to go into formal exercise because we're not saying that you have to get to the gym. You might be able to have a particular exercise or activity routine or regime that allows you to push your cardiovascular system in a healthy way. And one of the things about wellness people get very confused with is that people think that, oh, because you tell us to exercise, we have to run 10 miles. That's not necessarily the case because there's such a thing as unhealthy exercise where you can overexert the body. And then that becomes a health problem in itself. All right. So we're talking about healthy exercise and healthy activity. And there are people, for example, because of their schedules, might not be able to get to the gym. But you have an organization where it has an elevator. I'm familiar with the building in Warrens that houses a number of ministries. The same building that Rhonda and her team reside. And take the stairs, take the steps. You know, there's there are these what we call wellness wearables, these watches, trackers that can track your steps, your calories, and so on that are expended and your heart rate. Invest in some of those devices. Get moving. Okay. You might not be moving in the gym, moving on the road formally, but if you're moving at work, that is fine. Try not to sit down as much as possible. Healthy eating, of course. We can't talk about physical body or physical wellness without the mention of eating. You can exercise as much as you like. The kind of body that you want, the cardiovascular benefits that you need can also be, or I would say majority of that, those benefits will come through the eating. And it goes back to the point, it's really what you put into your body. All right. The same way that we talk about, um, you know, we talk about what you put into organization or what you put into a particular effort or activity matters. The input matters. The input, what you put into your body matters because you can eat, you can be exercising for years, exercising every day, and realize you're not seeing changes. You're not, and not just changes to your weight, because exercise is not just about weight management, all right. In fact, exercise people will tell you is um, really at the bottom when it comes to weight management. It is a very good support device for weight management, but your weight management really begins in the kitchen. All right. What you put in your body, what you put in your mouth. Okay. It's very important. And having that combination of exercise and healthy eating is going to be critical, not just for weight management, as I said, but for other cardiovascular benefits. Right. People don't know that. Many people still don't know that when you exercise and you eat healthily, that your blood vessels, especially depending on what you eat, can relax. So people with hypertension, for example, um, typically many of them, there are conditions where the blood vessels are very tight. And because of those narrow and tight blood vessels, you would now obviously have spikes in blood pressure. And sometimes what people don't recognize is that with eating, especially eating particular types of foods like beets, things that are related to providing nitric oxide, right, to your blood, into your bloodstream. It relaxes your blood vessels. Exercise does the same thing. When you exercise, your blood vessels automatically relax so that blood flow can happen. So having these things in combination is very important. Um, we know that we know about harmful habits like drug and alcohol abuse. Okay, that we've seen from, I think, the Surgeon General recently. Uh, there has there has been a particular claim, that a scientific claim now is scientifically backed claim, that there's now a link between alcohol use and certain types of cancers, and this particular risk is much higher in women. All right, so physical wellness speaks to, again, what we put in by way of particular substances, not just the traditional eating. And abstaining from those harmful habits is going to make a big difference. I don't think we talk enough about rest and sleep. There is a relationship between longevity and quality of sleep. And quality of sleep is defined not just how long you sleep, it also is a function of the uninterrupted journey of that sleep. Because if you can say you sleep for 8 hours, but you might not be sleeping, your sleep might not be in a particular way that is producing the rest that you need. So that's why there's some people who sleep for like hours, 10, but when they get up, they're still tired. All right. Their body has not been able to enter a particular space of sleep that will be considered to be high quality, and of course producing the benefits that it needs to recover when the morning comes. Prevention and management of physical illness and disease. Physical wellness recognizes that there are people who already have conditions. And that's a big thing about the wellness policy. I know we stress the proactive and preventative side when we talk about wellness, but wellness is not just preventative because there are a lot of people who already have conditions that they need to manage. Wellness is also about managing what you have. Okay. And I know that people talk about reversing diabetes, reversing this, and so on. And I don't really like to get into those conversations. My argument is that you can enter a wellness particular journey that allows you to manage your conditions in such a way that it almost feels that you don't have the condition. Now, this is something that I am always very careful of because medical practitioners will tell you, but you still gotta be careful because you can't say you don't have diabetes and it's gone, it's disappeared because we've known that diabetes is a chronic illness. And I think what has happened is that some people would say, well, I take these few herbs and the blood glucose is good, the blood pressure is good. But people don't realize that your blood pressure and blood glucose would change at different days. So you may measure it in the morning. Oh, it's really good. And you don't measure it again for the next 10 years. You happy. You think that's not how it works. This has to be an ongoing exercise. And there's a danger because we've seen it with cancer, where people would, they talk about holistic and there are benefits to holistic interventions, of course, natural remedies people talk about. But let's say you're at a particular stage of your cancer journey, and people say, "Man, don't worry about our chemotherapy," and there are some deleterious effects that you would obviously experience from radiation and chemotherapy treatments and so forth. But one of the worst things to do is to kind of come off those treatments just fully without having that consultation with your doctor. So even though we talk about all of these things that are controllable that we can do and we can, there's still that conversation with the medical practitioner that has to be had. All right. These people are trained, they're qualified. And I know there's many things that people don't agree with when it comes to medication. Like with hypertension, for example. I've been telling my grandmother, continue taking her medication. She's hypertensive. She's 78 now. And she's been, she's taking her medication. She's on blood thinners as well. And you know, people will argue, other family members would say, you just got to eat well and start walking. You got to worry about all that medication grants and so on. But at her age, and you found, and we found many stories, even in Ministry of Health, where people decided because they went straight on this natural path, completely, and there have been successes. Don't get me wrong, but there have also been cases, many more cases, where people have come off medication and the hypertension has been high and they have not been measuring the hypertension. It's been high, even though they're eating health. And that's usually because there's a part of hypertension that is a kind of an uncontrollable part of it. A genetic, perhaps it's genetically induced or whatever, but there's that part of that hypertension that for some people, for many people really, they still need the support of the medication. And even though you might be cutting out the salt and so on, that's why there's some people who do all of that and they still see hypertensive events happening. So it's important that, again, all of these things that we're having, when we talk about the national workplace wellness policy and all these things sound good. But of course, in partnership with your medical practitioner is going to be very important. Physical screening, tests, I think that's going to be critical. The only way we will know that we have something wrong with us is when we submit ourselves to screening. I know there are many people who are very scared to go to get tests for their prostate as men, especially for women. You have your particular concerns and your unique experiences. So cancer is one of those things, cancer testing, STI testing, sexually transmitted infections and diseases. That's important. And it's always important to know your status in whatever area, whether it's cancer, STIs, other NCDs, and other types of life conditions, disease conditions that you might very well have. Because it's only when you know that you are at this particular state, and if you know early enough that you have enough time and perhaps you can invest enough resources and support to be able to reverse it. Okay. And again, that is no guarantee, but at least you are equipped with the knowledge. Remember the definition that we talk about with wellness. You are becoming aware. So you can't have wellness in place if you're not aware of these things. So you might be doing all these things, but you're not checking your health and wellness. So how can you know where you're going and where you're at if you're not evaluating? All right. So it's so important. Psychological mental wellness. This second dimension, I think we are perhaps equally familiar with. This speaks to the psychological and mental state, goes beyond the physical. So it speaks to the attitudes, the emotions, the thoughts, our ability to understand not just our own personality in the workplace, but other personalities. So things like emotional intelligence is going to be a big thing. I teach a short session on emotional intelligence. And I don't think it's surprising to note that many people in workplaces, managers too, in certain senior positions, are quite emotionally unintelligent. And just as a definition here, emotional intelligence is the ability to understand one's emotions and as well as be able be having the ability to be able to regulate those emotions and also be able to understand and pick up other people's emotions. And it is a kind of we call it a soft skill, but I call it a solid skill because I think you can have all of the qualifications in the world, all the senior management position in the world, without emotional intelligence, it can impact on your success as a manager, especially dealing with employees of different kinds in different varieties. You yourself as employees, you need to also have that ability to be aware actively of your emotional states and be able to regulate, because the only way you can regulate is to be aware of the states themselves and be able to regulate those states in productive and constructive ways. So another key area in terms of mental health, as we know, would include things like stress, how we perceive stress. Stress in itself is a subjective experience, you know. We usually confuse a stressor with the stress. The stressor is the event that causes the stress. If I, for example, had a situation where there was a particular traumatic, and we define traumatic very subjectively. There was a significant somebody dropped down, fainted in the workplace, and the people who observe, there are some people who may have been affected much more adversely than others. You know, there's some people who can see somebody drop down, and because of their experience, because of what they've gone through, they're able to kind of deal with that particular event. But we got to recognize, but there are other people there who have been affected. We had, for example, if you remember recently, a gun-related incident offense at a gas station in St. Philip, and you had gas attendants who were more adversely affected than others, who were there present at the time of the offense, where somebody was killed. And it tells us then that organizations themselves, employers and employees, have to have mechanisms to support stress management, to support things like these types of traumatic events too, things like counselors, you know, and this is not to say that every organization has to have a counselor employed. We're not saying that. I mean, we know that there's so many creative and affordable ways that you can kind of outsource or kind of leverage mental health support from other circles, other arenas. The psychiatric hospital, a lot of people don't know, the psychiatric hospital actually provides mental health support interventions. When people think about the psychiatric hospital, people think about mental illness, which is totally different, by the way, from mental health. But mental illness and being a facility that houses people who are considered mentally ill is just one side of the psychiatric hospital. The psychiatric hospital also has a particular mandate, and we've worked, the Ministry of Labor, the committees have worked with the psychiatric hospital to help support other types of mental health interventions. Because even though you don't have a mental illness, all of us have mental health. Think about it. So all of us can be effective in different ways. And it suggests then that the workplace, which is a key stakeholder in this whole exercise, should be able to leverage those services affordably and reasonably from places like the psychiatric hospital, from there are certain NGO community-based organizations that provide counseling at a particular cost, that I think is quite affordable and accessible to many organizations. All right. There are people in the organization. I want to make the point too. There are people in organizations who are diagnosed with mental illnesses, and those people can operate in a way that is productive, that is constructive, that is healthy. The same way that somebody with a physical illness can operate through good management of that physical illness, a person with a mental illness can manage that and operate optimally in the workplace. But all of that then requires things like trust and confidence in the process. I actually did some work once looking at the willingness of employees to utilize an employee assistance program. An employee assistance program is a broad program that provides mental health support services to employees. When we had the COVID-19 pandemic, if you remember, a lot of organizations, especially public sector, had to leverage services from employee assistance programs, where, for example, counselors and psychologists came in to provide support. And this is obviously something that was based on self-referral. So you as an employee, you can actually refer yourself to a psychologist all through the particular environment of confidentiality and privacy, of course. And but one of the things that I found in the research that I did is that people don't use these programs or are not willing to use these programs if trust is not present. Because if I feel that if I go to a psychologist or I go to a counselor that an employer is paying for or employer is supporting, I may have, and I have a suspicion because of my history, listen to this, because of my history with this same organization for breaching confidentiality, that I'm going to be less inclined, I'm going to be disinclined to go to or support or participate in any initiative, even though it's for my benefit, because of that lack of trust. So even at the heart of this whole wellness policy and programming conversation has to be the conversation on trust. How do we build trust? And if trust has been broken, how do we rebuild that trust to make people comfortable to support their own mental health? Environmental wellness is another critical dimension. And I think this is probably less, you're probably less familiar with this one than the last two, the first two that we went through. Now, the environmental wellness component I love a lot because we have recognized, and let me just look at the definition here, the recognition that the environment has to be properly taken care of is seen in so many cases of whether they're schools, government offices, and we know about them because they're in the media, public spaces, where people go to the unions, they come down ill because there's mold in the wall, there's air quality hazards. There's a situation where there's a particular air quality. This would include things like scents. So you might have a school and people are coming down sick, they're coughing, they're getting these sores on their skin, and they don't know what's happening. And they go to the union, they go to complain to the government, and when you realize there's some environmental defect. And this is what we classify as environmental hazards. People call this particular situation when it becomes chronic, the sick building syndrome, if you're not familiar with that concept. So you have these sick buildings where people occupy, and largely because of the lack of maintenance, because when you look at the one of the factors, the main factors responsible for these particular events, environmental hazard events, or negative impacts on people, is the fact that a lot of these buildings have not been well maintained. Things like air conditioning units or cleaning up certain physical spaces like the walls. There's a lot of moisture getting into the structure, so they're creating mold and so on. And then there's this kind of, and there's neglect of the environment. And that neglect then creates consequences, of course, sometimes very severe. We've seen the situation at, if you all remember Louis Lynch, with the laundromat there, where all of a sudden there was a lot of chemicals and the effects of those chemicals. I'm not sure if it was fully confirmed, but there were people who were coming down very ill. And even long after, we've seen some of those observations of this sickness, sick building syndrome, sorry, that we have. So I think it's important that if we're going to be talking about wellness from physical and mental, we also got to talk about the environment. The fact that we have to hold not just employers, but each other accountable to ensure that the environment is healthy, is clean, and safe. Because I know, yes, the employers get all of the flat, you know, when it comes to all of the hits, all of the attacks when it comes to taking care of the building. But I think employees do have a role to play, because remember, you go to work each and every day, you observe these things happening. You have to, and there are many employees will see things happening and they don't say anything, you know, they don't speak out, or they don't make a contribution, or sometimes they're negligent. Sometimes the way that they perform their roles becomes something devastating to the environment. So then you play a contributory role to creating that harmful, negative environment, because you don't follow certain health and safety protocols as an employee. So I think both employers and employees have to take responsibility for that environment. Okay. Social wellness, another important dimension of the policy. I think it was so critical that we recognize that people, when they go to work, they interface with people, other people, and that's the social side of the workplace. It examines our relationship with people, how we relate with those people, how healthy those interpersonal interactions are. Because I can tell you that there are many people who go to work and they feel so stressed, they feel strained, because they know that when they enter the workplace, into the doors of that workplace, they have somebody who's toxic, whether it's a co-worker, a manager, or supervisor, and that toxicity is going to affect the other areas of their health, their physical, and their mental side. And we say that if we're going to do a policy, we're going to do it right. The social wellness side has to be tackled. There are many people who go to work in high conflict, highly highly tense environments in which interpersonal havoc, I call it interpersonal stress, occurs, whether and not just co-workers, it can be managers, it can be customers, because of the kind of work you do. It creates a very toxic environment. And again, we know what happens in toxic environments over time. They can force people to leave, force people can become sick because of the toxicity. So we have to think about ways in which we can promote social harmony, and not that we can promote a conflict free, because there will always be conflict. Conflict is a natural event in our daily lives, but it's how we manage the conflict. Okay, it's how we resolve conflict that matters. Intellectual wellness. Now you're wondering, what is this? What is intellectual wellness? It sounds so theoretical. Now, not really. If you think about the word intellect, we're not talking about, and people get confused here. We're not talking about people who are very intelligent. So this only applies to a certain section of society. No, 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 no. Everyone has intellectual wellness. Intellectual wellness recognizes the creative and innovative abilities in a workplace, and a desire, sometimes innate to us, to grow our knowledge and skills. You know, there are people who come to work, they're very happy with the work they do, but they're intellectually stagnant. The workplace doesn't allow for them to be creative. There's always a no when we think about something different that we can offer the workplace that can actually contribute to productivity. There are some employers who are quickly, who like to play the no, I call it in the no playbook. They like to say no very quickly, and they don't give enough space for employees to actually be innovative. And you know what? Over time, people start holding back. I've done some research in the public sector in the same way. And people have argued that in the public sector is always a space where people are very scared to take initiative, because you have a permanent secretary, or you go ahead to the department who says that you got to follow these rules, you got to do this. It's very rule centric, and it becomes problematic. And people argue that this is a culture of the public service. And but I don't agree that it is kind of pervasive that we may think. Because there are, I think, pockets of the public service where we have seen tremendous innovation, tremendous creativity. And that's what we talk about when we talk about intellectual wellness. When employers and employees can create enabling environments for people to feel comfortable and safe to take healthy risks, to be creative, to be innovative, and to kind of think and practice new things that can make a difference to the organization. That's what we mean about intellectual wellness. And you might argue, but this seems to be still adjacent, not directly related to health, but it is related to health, because that intellectual creativity and innovation can go a long way in terms of thinking about how you can actually even engage in these same wellness programs and come up with great ideas of how you can how different people in the organization can contribute to wellness overall. Now, occupational wellness is again perhaps a equally less familiar concept here, but this is an important dimension because if you're talking about the workplace, occupational wellness actually means, and this is not to be confused with, because it is a workplace wellness policy. So to have the dimension occupational doesn't mean that this is the only dimension that speaks to the workplace. All of these dimensions speak to the workplace if you think about it. Occupational wellness, however, speaks to your occupation. Think about the word occupation, the role that you are in, how you feel about that role. So when you think about occupational wellness, you think about things like your satisfaction with what you do. Do you love what you do? There are many people who go to work and love what they do, and then there are other people who go to work and do not love what they do. They feel unfulfilled. There are people who feel that they don't have a work-life balance, and that is a quite dynamic process because you can never achieve ultimately work-life balance. And the work-life balance is something that comes and go. You can have work-life balance yesterday and have it, and lose it tomorrow or the next day. So the goal here is not really to achieve a work-life balance, but how do you balance as a process your work commitments and your life demands? Do you grow in your career? There are people who feel very stagnant. They've been in a role for 10, 20 years, and they're seeing no room for advancement. Okay? That's what we mean when we talk about occupational wellness. In other words, do you feel that you are growing in your job, professionally speaking, right? Spiritual wellness, and this one was one that we added pretty late into the wellness policy, sometime in 2017, when we started the development process. And that was because there's obviously the contention that that spirit is something that we can observe. There's some people who don't believe in spiritual stuff, and that's fine. But we recognize that coming from a particular country that has a strong faith-based commitment, and I use the word faith-based because I know that we are predominantly Christian, but there are people from different faiths. And then there are people who don't have a religious affiliation, and they're not necessarily atheists, because having no religious affiliation doesn't mean that you're atheist. You may still believe that there's a broader particular meaning in which you live beyond the life that you're living. There's something much bigger out there that guides your existence. And there's another way you can operationalize spiritual wellness, independent of any religion, because it's not religious wellness. Let's be clear here. Irrespective of any religious affiliation or faith-based commitment, all it speaks to is really that guiding set of beliefs, principles. Because all of us, I believe, have some kind of belief system, principled agenda, value framework that we follow, whether it's from socialization from young, that give meaning and purpose to our life. Things like a capacity for love. I think that's something that is universal to all humans. Compassion, forgiveness, altruistic behaviors. I think spiritual wellness to me is more about thinking and speaking and acting in ways that are consistent with our spiritual beliefs. And organizations, I know people argue that, but there should be no space for spirituality talk. But every individual comes into organization as a multidimensional character. Nobody can say to you, take off your personal hat, leave it at the door before you come into the organization. Because if you're someone who's a victim of domestic violence, You're somebody who is a paid caretaker of a very sick relative, and that is on your mind, you can't just take that off into the organization. You come as a holistic individual. So those spiritual values that you carry are going to be important in that organization. We're not saying here that you're evangelizing, you're trying to change anyone or to get them to see the way that you see spirituality. That's not what this is about. This is recognizing that there is a space for it and that people do rely on this. All right. Somebody asked in the chat what altruism means. So let me explain. So altruism is when somebody helps or provides assistance without any expectation of any return of reward. So if I, for example, decided to provide, like let's say I met somebody at work who has no money, or living paycheck by paycheck, it's very difficult for them. And confidentially, I start supporting them. I say, look, I can give you like $200 there. Now, we're not saying that you have to give people $200, but let's say out of your heart, you provide that help. And you're not providing help because you want to get in bed with the person or you want the person to give you something. You're doing it because you just want to help. That's altruism. So altruism is where you provide help, you provide assistance without the expectation of something coming back to you. Okay. No problem, Rochelle. And then we have the dimension of cultural wellness. I love this dimension. This was one that we thought was critical because if you think about culture, the culture that you are in plays a big role in your wellness journey. We have come from a particular culture where, when your grandmother gives you, especially a lot of food on that plate on Sunday, it is a kind of is obligatory that you complete that plate the Sunday. So all of the macaroni pie, the rice, and so, and this is not to say you can't enjoy yourself, but if you think about it, every Sunday, I know for some households, a certain type of food and in a certain portion size, which is very large, is a common thing. And that becomes a cultural device. Because when we go other ways and let's say we go to other places and we buy food, because of that socialization, we believe that we should have this amount of macaroni pie, this amount of chicken and pork, and very few pieces of veg or salad that is on our plate. That's cultural. Um, there's this cultural thing too that people believe that you have to be extremely large to be attractive, and we see that in some African cultures, um, and in no way this is fat shaming, because I want to also say something that we don't think about when we talk about weight management. I keep reminding people, is not you're not just tackling obesity or the overweight culture that you see in a country, but you're also tackling people who are grossly underweight. Now we know that we don't have that issue in terms of we have a more significant issue on the obesity side. But there are pockets of households, pockets of the population that are grossly underweight. They're not eating enough, and their body is reflecting a kind of a starved disposition that is equally unhealthy. So cultural wellness speaks to how we have how we come to a greater awareness and knowledge of our own cultural background and how it impacts our lives. And cultural wellness also speaks to how we understand other people's culture and how those cultures affect us and what we do. So, one of the things, I think one of the best examples is the vegan culture. I call it a vegan culture. It is, or the vegan lifestyle. 20, 30 years ago, very few people in Barbados knew about veganism. Yes, there are the people who were long standing would tell you, I was always vegan. It's just that that particular word comes out and everybody using it now. And, I was always vegan and so on. But to be quite frank, a lot of the organizations that provided food, restaurants, it's only recently that we've seen a lot of restaurants offering vegan options, for example, right? And all of these were because of the influences recently, contemporarily, that have entered through social media and other devices into our culture. And I always believe, and I don't have a problem, because people get vexed when people argue that, people get vexed when they see or observe influences from other countries coming into our culture. But as cultures, there's no culture on the planet Earth in any country that was created in a vacuum. The Roman cultures, the Greek cultures, Caribbean cultures were all cultures that were imported. Yes, there are what we call natural state cultures that create when people come together, and we create what we call the Bajan culture. But over time, cultures evolve, and that evolution can hurt or make, or in this case, assist us from a health and wellness perspective in the same vein. All right. Cultural wellness is also, I think, when I broaden the definition over the development process, one of the things I included is that cultural wellness refers to the way people also interact with other people who they consider to be different from them. So people of different ethnic groups, people of different religious affiliations, people of different sexual gender, even people with disabilities. All right. So diversity, and I know that's not a very that's very well accepted now in the US, diversity and equity and inclusion, but there's a need for diversity and appreciating diversity in the workplace. Is a reality in Barbados. We have a lot more non-nationals being regularized, coming into Barbados, and they're still, and this is not peculiar to Barbados. There are people who would, in other countries have come, people going to Trinidad and other countries and will feel that Barbadians taking up their jobs or Guyanese taking up their jobs, or, we always have that problem. We always had that problem as a region where we get a bit apprehensive when we see foreign persons coming in from even developed countries, um, feeling that they're stealing our jobs. And this is, if you think about this sentiment is no different from what we see from a right wing environment where there's this fear of, and this is not to say that you have to safeguard certain particular privileges that citizens have, because I'm a believer that I can agree on a point that Trump makes, but I don't have to agree with him wholly on another point. I was making this point the other day that people tend to, I think what has happened now is that a lot of people are becoming what I consider to be side centric. You got to choose a side. So if you choose the side on the right, let's say you're a Trump supporter, you got to believe everything that Trump says. If everything he does, from tariffs to removing this, you got to go with it. If you're on the left and you believe in a particular like feminism or transgenderism and all kind of things, you got to believe everything they say. So you stick on a particular narrative. And I think we have lost the ideas of what I consider to be the issue-centric philosophy, where I can agree on either side on issues or particular perspectives that they may share. I can agree with a feminist when a feminist says a particular point. I can agree with that. And Trump may say something and say, well, that makes sense. But the other things that he say, I might say, but that doesn't make sense. I should be able to say that without choosing a side. And I think that's the whole appreciation of being issue centric. And diversity is a very important issue in workplaces. So we got to recognize the value that it brings to the workplace. Well, a person with a disability, a person from a particular community that we might not like, the person might come from Black Rock like me, because I grew up in Black Rock, and there's a particular stain that many people from Black Rock or specific areas of Black Rock may feel when they go apply for a job. I've done a lot of work with young people of crime, in crime, what we call in crime-oriented communities, and they will tell you that they sometimes feel very taken back when they rent the application and they have to put their address, because they know that when the employer sees that they're from Freehill, Black Rock, or they're from the Deacon's Farm, that it is not going to help their it's not going to help them to their advantage of getting that job, because there's this kind of well-known stigma that's associated with where we live. So cultural wellness is that kind of appreciation, being tolerant, understanding that people are different and appreciating those differences. Financial wellness is the last dimension, and this is a very critical dimension to me. We included this at the end of 2017 because when we did the testing and the surveys, we realized a lot of people were saying, you know what, if you're going to talk about wellness, we got to talk about financial wellness. There are a lot of people, let's be honest, who are living in Barbados. They're working for very good salaries enough. They're working for $10, $12, $13,000 a month. But because of socialization, they don't have a good relationship with money. There are people who can win the lottery $3 million. Less than 5 years, less than 2 years, somebody might say a year, the money blown up. Because they never came in, they never had the exposure growing up in a household. And I can say this predominantly for the Black community, that you go in your household and you learn about how to manage money, how to manage debt. You know, for many of us, we've been accustomed to the credit culture, the credit card, and nothing wrong with credit cards, but is the management credit cards. We do a lot of consumption credit card. And then we take so long to pay back the credit card because we put ourselves in debt because we never understood how the impact of debt, especially on manageable debt, because there's nothing wrong with debt, but unmanageable debt becomes the problem. Now, how does this link back to wellness? It links back to wellness because you can see that there are contributions that this can make to your physical and your mental health. All right, even your social wellness, living within your means, understanding how you manage your money. When we talk about financial literacy, it fits within this whole environment here. The focus then on this particular wellness dimension for the policy is about how do we build financial literacy? How do we teach our young people and older people? There are many older people who are financially illiterate about how to manage their savings, how to manage their debt. One of the things I'm working with is the Ministry of People Empowerment. We're looking at re-engineering the social protection sector. Yes, my hands are in many pots. And the social protection sector, there's a particular class of people known as pensioners. Those, and there's a smaller category of elderly people, because you have elderly people who might not be pensioners, they might not have a pension income, but they have a good savings, so they're living pretty good. But then there are people who are pensioners, and I'm talking about people who are non-contributory or contributory pension schemes. And if we talk about non-contributory pension, a lot of those people, not all of them, let me just say that, because of sometimes the way that they have set up their particular professional lives, they probably, let's say they've gone into a particular situation where they've not been fully registered, so they were working informally, so they weren't paying contributions and so on. They come to the point they need to retirement and say, you know what, I'm no longer going to have a job. I'm no longer able because of age. I can't deal with this business. I'm self-employed. I was self-employed, and then go into this kind of retirement stage that I place on me, or the organization placed on me, but expect to live the same lifestyle that they were living before retirement. Another example is that I've observed people very close to retirement who've taken on big mortgages or refinance. And I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that, but if you're going to do these things, recognize that there's a life after. When you refinance more because you want to pay for the grandson university tuition in Canada or whatever, and you go in now to a state of retirement, and you find yourself the retirement earnings that you have, let's say and it's worse if you're on non-contributory, because non-contributory is not an entitlement. That's the thing, you have to go through an assessment process. People think that you can easily get non-contributory. Oh, just apply, you get non-contributory pension. That doesn't work. A lot of these people to get the non-contributory pension is not enough, and they can't go on welfare because there's a particular you can't have both in a sense. I mean, I think the government is trying to work out something, I guess, as we go forward in terms of legislation when it comes to non-contributory pensions and those on welfare. But if you're on welfare, for example, and you're trying to get, you might say, okay, let me see if I can find a particular income source from the NIS. It's going to be difficult there because you would have to then go off from that scheme. So to avoid these situations, I believe in a particular proactive approach of educating people from very young as they enter the workplace. And I will go further, as early as primary school. You teach people how to manage money, how to manage debt, what is finances, what is you don't have to, if you're looking at a neighbor and he has the biggest house, the house costs $1 million. They went to a bank and get a mortgage for $1 million. You gotta be able to work out, is that the same experience for you? Can you go and get the same $1 million house because that neighbor or friend who says, or they take out a car that costs $100,000? Are these decisions sensible? And that's all about financial literacy. It doesn't mean that you can't enjoy those types of lifestyles, but it means that if you are going to plan them in, then you have to put yourselves in a position to do so. So you're going to be seeing a lot of resources when it comes to financial planning and financial literacy. Okay. I'm just following the chat as we talk, because I wanted to still keep this interactive. Um, somebody is making a point here. Jerry Eiffel, thanks for your comment, or question rather. The overarching structure of this workplace wellness policy are its 9 tenets. How do you move from policy to a workable framework? So actually, I'm going to talk about that now. And because all of these things are, of course, resident in the policy, but the question is, how do we implement, how do we make this something practically within the workplace? Now, one of the things that I actually had coined in 2019, 2018 was a framework or approach, and this is based on my experience and scientific inquiry. I came up with this approach called the 4E approach. I've written a paper on it. So it's not, you're not going to find this like in other countries. So Barbados is the first to have this approach, right? So 4E approach. Now the 4E approach is saying, okay, so how do we start? And this can apply to any device that you want to implement. You know, it doesn't have to be the national workplace wellness policy. It could be anything that you want to implement within your household. It could be in the workplace. But because of the purposes of this webinar, we're going to look at how we can apply it and make it a practical reality in our workplace. So the 4E approach says that there are 4 E's. I learned this part of this from my grandmother. So the whole notion that if you want people to be able to take on a particular practice, let's say make a change in the way they do things. In fact, if we put it in the context of the workplace wellness policy, if you were thinking about what is the first thing that has to be done to implement this policy, because right now, Devonish, all you're telling me are the dimensions, but I don't know where to start. The first thing to start is to educate people. You can be educated. Education allows people to soften themselves, even things like resistance to certain things. Because usually people resist things. Because if you start coming to people and start saying, you got to do this, people start pushing back because you're trying to implement a change that they're not accustomed to, especially in a work environment. Who are you to come and tell me what to do or what to eat? All right. But education, what it does is that it kind of deconstruct certain biases, sometimes even fallacious thinking that people have about wellness. And I think one of your first things then, I think your first remits would be to educate, find ways to foster awareness, not just on the policy, but on wellness in general. Um, find ways in which you can educate people. And but what's the key requirement here then? It means that every person in this webinar here, one of the first steps then is to educate yourselves. Because before you can educate anybody else about wellness and the policy, you have to find a space where you are in yourself educated about the same things. Because you won't go to a doctor who has not been educated in medicine, right? That doctor had to had to go through an educational journey to then be qualified to become a medical practitioner. In the same way, if you're going to be embarking on the implementation of this or making this something practical, you have to be familiar. That's why we will be sharing resources with you. That's why we're going to have a website set up, which I'll share the details during the week. Rhonda Farley, who's, as you know, the office attached to the Ministry of Labor responsible for wellness, we're going to make sure that she sits on the same subcommittee, that all of that information is there for you so you can educate yourselves and you then become that partner in the educational interventions within your workplace. All right. It doesn't mean that you have to be the one to teach it. It could be the one where you bring in somebody who can also provide the awareness building intervention or the education. So I think the first step is to educate people. The second thing is that education is not going to be the only thing that is going to be sufficient for change. As we all know that education can give you all of the knowledge, but many cases we've seen people who are highly educated, but they don't translate that into action. So I came up with the second E, which is called enable. Enable means that there are people who are educated, but they're in environments where there are no support systems, there are no resources, there's no context in which they can translate what they know into action. And that's because there are many employers out there who will invest in education, but then when it comes to actually giving the employees resources or giving them support systems or even opening up opportunities for them to engage in different wellness programs. Zilt, no, there's nothing in the budget for it. And that is a problem. So my second E, enabling, means you're creating those support systems alongside the educational function. So the second step to implementation is to ensure that after or during, really, because education is an ongoing effort, is to ensure that there are enablers in the environment, and there's a removal of barriers, whether they're human barriers, attitudinal barriers, structural barriers, financial barriers, to overcome that particular resistance, okay, to implementation. The third E, which is engage, you have to be able to engage people. People can be educated and they can be enabled. But if you're going to be doing wellness implementation, you have to be able to allow staff, allow people from all quarters, all arenas of the organization to feel involved. The worst thing in the world is when you develop something behind closed doors and then all of a sudden spring it or foist it onto people who had no or little input into that said program. And you expect people then to embrace it. One contribution here, I'm saying, in the third E, the 4E framework, the third E is that you have to create structures where people are part of those structures. So, like, for example, setting up a committee in your workplace should be diverse. You should have different people. Don't just put managers on the committee. Make it multifaceted. Have different types of people on the committee so that they can help. They can feel part of the conversation. Communicate with people. Communication is so important because it's an important instrument for building trust, for sustaining trust, for ensuring that there's a level of buy-in from your group, from your workforce. Because I can tell you, you can leave this webinar very excited about this whole journey and then hit a roadblock. Unless you go through these 4 E's, you're going to hit that brick wall. The last E I created was called the encouragement E. So imagine that you have education, you have enabling, you have engagement, involvement, but then over time, you realize that there's a plateau. You know, the people who would engage in wellness activities, and then at a particular point, there's a fall off. So you realize that there are less people, fewer people coming to like the workshops that you probably putting on in the organization on wellness. You find that people are slacking back, and that happens. You know, sometimes we will see after Christmas, January, everybody in the gym. By March, April, the gym half empty because there's always that sustainability issue that happens. As somebody would call it, life happens. And then people get distracted and they don't go back to the gym. They forget about the wellness journey that they started in January after Christmas. Encouragement is saying you have to be able to build in systems to incentivize people to engage in wellness. And you might argue, but why must I incentivize people? That should be a self-incentive to be healthy. That's not always the case. Organizations can do a lot when it comes to putting in reward systems. And that's something that we want to work on as a committee. Rhonda will tell you at some point in the future, where we would like to have a national recognition program for observing wellness. So what would happen is that organizations can be nominated for being a wellness champion because they'll be doing things that are consistent with the policy, wellness activities, and so on, inherent in the different dimensions, and they can be, you know, nominated and awarded on an annual basis. So these things go a long way. Now, we don't have to wait on that national recognition system. You can have your own workplace or departmental level recognition award program where instead of having it tied to just performance, tie it to wellness. And you can have an employee who is a wellness champion for a month, and you could put their picture up. You could be creative in this, you know. You could take out an ad in the newspaper, thanking Miss John Stamos for contributing to the physical wellness dimension. We as an organization appreciate you. That goes a long way because people feel good when they are recognized, oftentimes publicly, you know. And then there are people who feel very good when they are recognized privately. And there's nothing that is wrong with pulling somebody aside and saying you did a good job there in terms of that wellness thing you're doing. You know, I can see changes in your body and so on. People feel good when you tell people. I think we have too many situations where people like to criticize people. They like to tell you you're getting fat, You're getting this and that. You know, people can be very, and Bajans too. We know that. We either Bajans. So Caribbean people generally, we can be very critical of people in terms of how they look and what they're doing, what they're eating, and so on. But we are very slow to tongue when it comes to giving people appreciation and praise for something that they're doing well. And I think we have to kind of create that culture, embrace that culture, and foster that culture throughout our organizations. Okay, very important. So I just want to kind of close off with some tips as we approach 10 minutes to the time that we have. And by the way, I'm going to share this PowerPoint with all of you. So don't worry. Everything that belongs to me belongs to you. All right. So the first tip, somebody asked the question about education and how we start. Read the policy. I'm going to share the resources with you. You have to make time to read it. I have met people who said, I have the policy, Devonish. But if you ask them a question, I had to give you an exam. I'm a lecturer on campus, as people know. If I give you an exam, you should be able to get at least 80%. Because if I ask you a question about the policy, you should be able to answer it, right? I know that we are not in a society, we are in a society that has changed where people don't read as much. I've actually done a survey on literacy in Barbados. You're probably going to see the results of that survey. So it looked at how people read, how often do people read, how literate people are, how able are people to interpret information. That's a significant problem that we have in this country. So I've shared that with the government already. The reading the policy, familiarize yourselves with it. Now, the thing about it, the policy is a big document. It's about 70, 60 pages. What I have done with the support of the committees is that I've created a shorter summation of the policy, probably 20 pages, well, 15 pages or less, I think. You could read that as well, right? If you're not open to reading the entire document like that, or you don't have the time. All of the resources there, they're going to be of different sizes. We have videos that can give you, like these small videos, 3-minute videos that can give you a bit on the policy that can help you. But the basic information you need to know is the nature, the objective of the policy, what are the wellness dimensions? Because those are just 3 key things that you need to know. What is the nature, the objective of the policy? You can pull that very quickly from this presentation and from the policy itself. What are the 9 dimensions and what each one means? And who will be responsible for implementation? That's something that has to be kind of negotiated with you and your employer, or your management, right? Like, you might have a wellness committee. I have a safety committee, sorry, already set up. You can kind of rework that committee to kind of incorporate wellness in the conversation. All right. So that's going to be very important. Oh, of course, and the 4E framework: educate, enable, engage, and encourage. All right. Always cut. No, I always believe in tailoring your message. When you communicate to people, when you keep talking, let's say you educate yourselves and you're talking to people, always think about how you customize your communication based on who you're speaking to. Because if you're speaking to management who are representatives of employers, the conversation is going to be different in the sense that managers or employers tend to focus more on what are the bottom line benefits, the financial, the economic benefits of this policy. And you can talk about how it improves productivity and reduces absenteeism. An individual is going to be more concerned about how it helps him or her, because they might not care too much about how much money it can save the organization. He cares more so, or she cares more so about how it's going to help me personally. So that's what you will find, and this happens, and this is not peculiar to anything. Like the policy is universal. Anything that you're trying to sell to somebody, people want to know what the benefits are. And I keep telling people, even businesses, that people don't buy products and services. People buy the benefits that come with the products and services. So products don't matter and services don't matter in their own right. It is the symbolic value that people place on it. And much of our selling or our communication to get buy-in is really about how we sell those benefits, how we sell the value, which is personal for everybody. Because the value that I see in something may not be the same that somebody sees in it, a different person sees in it. All right. So I always believe in keeping the message simple. When you go to people and you see how I provided this webinar, I seldom went into very advanced language terms or jargon. I was accessible, I hope, to all of you, so you understood what I was saying. So clarity is going to be your friend when it comes to securing buy-in. Because if you make something like this a very complex conversation, you're going to have a very low uptake, all right, in or buy-in from the people that you're trying to sell it to. All right. Provide real life examples. People like when you provide real life examples. I think from my presentation, you've seen that I've used a lot of examples from my own real life experience and from my research and so on. I think when you're communicating, it's important you bring out real life examples. Perhaps it might not be yours. It could be people that you know and how they have benefited from going through a particular wellness exercise. And I think it makes it more relatable, the policy, so it doesn't come across as a policy document and a theoretical exercise. All right. I think I've talked about focusing on the benefits and the benefits being mutual, not just the employers are getting these benefits and nobody else, but there's a mutual transaction of benefits that takes place. Okay, very important. And create a safe space for open communication. Don't broadside people, don't criticize people. People will have their own perspectives. Not everybody's going to buy into this. Trust me, we know this. But you do your best to reach as many as you can. That's all you can do. And I think you begin that particular exercise by having an open and honest communication platform where people feel comfortable to share their views. As harsh as those views are, you're able to hear it. Open dialogue builds trust and it ensures that people feel heard in the policy document. And of course, as much as you can, I believe in assessing your workplace wellness needs. As I said earlier, the needs of one organization is going to be different from another organization. Anytime you're going to implement something, you have to know exactly where you are. The same way you go to the doctor before you start eating what you want to eat, you will go to the doctor to find out what you need to eat based on whatever condition you have. I think if you're going to apply the wellness policy the same way, you have to find out the needs of the organization. And hence that information becomes important inputs into the kinds of programs that you might want to embark upon for that organization. And of course, I mentioned this already, find ways to recognize and reward employees. And these are some examples that I've come across in the literature, things that you can do, employee spotlights, where you can have a session where you highlight people on social media. You might have a social media handle for your organization. You can put up their pictures and say, so-and-so is doing well in this area. You can do a wellness champion award. As I said earlier, it could be monthly or quarterly. Recognition, peer-to-peer recognition, where people can nominate each other to inspire healthy behaviors and so on. And if you go as far as incorporating it into the performance management system, that's fine. All right. But those are conversations that you might want to have with your management and the union if you're unionized, of course. All right. I'm going to close off this presentation by saying that you have to measure it. If you're going to change something or manage it, you have to be able to measure it. And one of the things that I find useful is having tools or mechanisms in place that allow you to measure how well you're implementing. Now, somebody asked the question, for example, in the chat, I think it was Jerry, but how do I make this practical? Now, what I have developed last year is known as a workplace wellness action checklist. So this is a checklist that I developed. I'm just going to show you on my screen here. Hope you're seeing the screen. One second. Let me reshare the screen just in case you can see it. So I've developed a checklist, and this is one of the resources that you will get in the email. Maybe send out the email to all of you to acquire the resources. So what the checklist does is there are two versions of the checklist. There's an Microsoft Excel version, which is the electronic version of a checklist. And what it does for each of the dimensions, it tells you what your organization can actually do. Look at it here. So under physical wellness, it tells you, it does it in a way of asking questions. So under physical wellness, it says, is there information in your organization that provided to employees on healthy eating and nutrition? Does the workplace encourage regular physical exercise and activity? Now, what the checklist goes beyond, just give you actually indicators that you can use, actual activities that you can use for each dimension, is that it has a scoring module that I developed, right? So in the scoring module, let's say, for example, you said you check your department, and it doesn't have to be a department organization, it can be a department. You can operationalize it how you want it. Because as I said, some departments might want the wellness operationalization of the policy done and not the entire organization. And that can happen because you can have a situation where it started as a department and then it kind of balloons into the larger organization. But the checklist, as I was going back to, there's a module that allows you to indicate whether the organization satisfies that checkpoint. So let's say the organization does have a structured wellness program on physical wellness. You can say satisfied, and it gives you a score from 0 to 100%. So you could actually score your organization on how well it is meeting the various criteria from the checklist. Now, if it is in progress, you don't get a point, but it highlights in a yellow. So I kind of use some code in here. And it's really useful. And each dimension, there are 50 indicators. So that's 50 by 9, 450. So at any point, you can go over each month. And you don't have to check every day, please. You can do this every quarter. And you can go back to the checklist and see if you meet certain requirements. And you can use the indicators as part of your planning, because the indicators are very clear. If you go across to like psychological wellness, it tells you what you can put in place, and if you satisfy that, and it gives you a percentage. Now, at the very end of the checklist, there's a dashboard that was created. It summarizes where your percentage. So you can see like percentages here. So based on how many you're satisfied in each area out of 50. So if you got 20 out of 50, or rather 25 out of 50, that's 50%. You will know, okay, next year, boy, we gotta get close to 80% or 7%. So you can actually set KPI targets. So this is a beautiful checklist, you know, developed here on wellness. So you're gonna get this free of charge. There is that's the electronic version. For those who are not too fancy or too in vogue in the electronic, there's a print ready version of the checklist that I developed as well. So this is a PDF document. You will also have this in the resources that we will share. But obviously it's not, you will have to print it out and make the thing. It's not as interactive as the Excel. I prefer the Excel because you can see the percentages adding up, but you have to do it by manual application. All right. So team, I am happy to invite any questions. I know we're just after 12, but I don't think that the organizers here are going to close off immediately at 12. We can still give about 10 to 15 minutes, I believe, for questions. Any questions? It was really an engaging session for me, and I hope it was one for you. Thank you so much. I'm just following some of the comments here in the chat. Can you share in full mode? Oh, sorry, I think you probably needed the screen share. Probably I wasn't able to get it shared properly, but when you receive it, you're gonna have its full operationalization. So you have the Excel, you have all of that. But I think it probably might be the way the Zoom is set up for sharing. All right, just following the chat here quickly. Sorry. Probably lose the comments. Is there a list of resources within the government? Kathy, we have good news. We are setting up a website. It's going to be launched this month. You're probably going to see it on the media coming out in terms of CBC and so on. And the website is going to have a repository of all of the SAID resources that you would need. Now, the resources that I'm going to share by either this evening or tomorrow through Ms. Farley, attached to the Ministry of Labor to all of you, because we have all of your email addresses, would be some of those resources. But when the website is launched in the middle of March, you will have then that open invitation to go and download all of those resources. But remember, the committee, we have a subcommittee, so the website will tell you about the subcommittee. You can reach out to me as the chairperson of the subcommittee or Farley to get additional support. So guys, this is not the end of this journey. We're gonna have a lot more interventions coming your way. Any more questions, guys? I'm seeing Teresa. Teresa, you see your hand is up. Not sure if that's an old hand. I see your mic is open. So there's some mics that are open. So if you want to talk, you can, it seems. Teresa Harewood saying her hand is up here. Not sure if she's aware. I'm going to share this PowerPoint along with the resources. Or if you're unable to talk, you can use the chat box. Just give you a few minutes to get any questions, because 2 hours, as you know, is never enough time to really deliver the session. Okay, there's no microphone option. Okay, thank you for telling me, Vanessa, because I guess because Zoom has what we call a webinar feature setup. It separates panelists, which I'm part of that section of the Zoom. We have access to, as you know, to the video and the microphone. So the attendees do not. So they only access is the chat feature in Zoom. Right. But I'm still seeing, but I'm seeing mics open, so I'm not sure what's happening here. I'm seeing a mic icon next
Hello?
to Vanessa.
Hello?
Hi. Hi.
Right.
Paul?
If they need to talk, they can raise their hand and I would enable the microphone.
Okay, there we go, guys.
Vanessa, I just enable hers because she said there was no microphone, so she can speak.
Okay,
Vanessa
thank
Mason.
you. Thank you. So that's Paul, our IT support here. So he says that if you want to talk, you can raise your arm, usually obviously the raise arm feature on Zoom, and he would activate your microphone. So you will see it appear. Okay. If you want to just chat. Hi, Vanessa. Hi.
Good afternoon. I didn't really want to speak, but as I have been given the opportunity, I will do so. I think that this is a notable initiative, and I'm looking forward. I know our workplace has started some wellness initiatives, and I'm looking forward to our workplace receiving the information so that we could be able to fully adopt and assess ourselves. I'm not sure if I missed it, but will you or the labor team be doing like consultations with like individual ministries or departments to provide guidance in areas where they may not be sure about? Is that something that will be happening as well?
Yes, because we actually created a 3-year plan, and one of the things that we want to do for the 3-year plan is to become more intimate with organizations. In our first 2 years, what we were really doing was pushing out information. So we were not really going into organizations within those 2 years. But at this particular financial year, and we are following the government's financial year, which begins in April and ends in March. But for the new financial year, we want to be more present in organizations. So for example, let's say your organization or your ministry, because remember this is public and private sector, your ministry might reach out to the Ministry of Labor through Rhonda Farley, who is the officer tied here to that particular portfolio of wellness. And we could arrange something. We might say, okay, all right, no problem. We get people, or we will have a team of people who come in and can help. Now, you could appreciate that we are a small team, so we can't stretch ourselves all over the place or thin. So there may be situations where we would be able to come to you physically, or we might have, we might set up a particular form like how we set it up, like now, a webinar where we invite you and others to participate. Okay, so we'll try to deal with it based on how heavy the demand is that we can support. Okay. Yes, Gail, sorry, Vanessa, I hope that was helpful. So Gail said, I do not remember hearing the mention of employee assistance program. Yes, I did mention employee assistance program when I was talking about the dimension of mental or psychological wellness. I was making the point that during COVID, if you all remember, some organizations were able to activate their employee assistance program, which is a program that provides mental health support services or psychological support services to employees when they need it. And you can actually allow for what we call a self-referral process, where employees can refer themselves to a psychologist that is attached to the program that the employer is financing, okay? And that is done obviously under a confidential arrangement, all right? But I was making the point that it requires trust, because not everyone is going to be inclined to use those types of resources, even though to their advantage, if trust has been hurt in any way.
Hey, Dwayne, sorry, I just want to add for the public service.
Yes.
The employee assistance program is still administered through the Ministry of the Public Service in collaboration with the network services. So that is
yes.
There was a question earlier in the chat about if there's a cost to the assistance, tied to the assistance from the committee, government. No, there's no cost. Well,
There's
not
no
from
cost.
us. You may have a cost dependent on who, if you have to get additional assistance aside from what we are offering.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, because yes, we as a committee, we are providing this as a public good, because of course this comes under the portfolio of government. But remember, we may engage you, and depending on your situation, we might give you further resources that then might very well be a cost to you. So for example, we are developing a directory at some point, or for this year, where we would have like a list of people, and those people will be like, you will have the list of expertise attached to those individuals, and you might have a particular you might want somebody who's very good in mental health. Now I might know somebody very good. I might say, well, I refer you to this person, but that arrangement that you have that person might very well be a kind of a financial transactional arrangement. Because that person might say, well, there's a cost to or there's a fee. So that would be at your level, that level. But from our particular encounter, it would not be, as Rhonda said, fee incurring.
And let me just add, thank you, Marquita City, for reminding that the first 3 sessions from the Employee Assistance Program for government those are free. The first 3 sessions.
Very true. Very true. Somebody had a hand up. Somebody else. I think I say Susan.
This is Susan can offer some additional.
Yes, I was just about to confirm.
Yes.
I was just waiting patiently to be given the opportunity to just speak. Right, I just wanted to confirm that with public officers that they will be entitled to this annually 3 free sessions. Yeah. So that if it is then that they have to get more than 3 sessions, depending on what the nature of the challenge is, they would, after that, then they will have to incur the expense on their own, but at least the first 3 sessions would be free, and that's on an annual basis. So if you got 3 free sessions last year, then next year, and if the issue continues or there's another issue, because life is so dynamic, you know, then you'll be entitled again to the 3 free sessions. So I just wanted to point out that.
Before
Thanks
you
for
go,
sharing.
Miss Seeley,
Yes, please.
then can you expand? Remember, there were a couple additional areas where persons can also access in terms of the for network services.
Oh, okay. Well, it can, as Dr. Devinis said earlier, it could be self-referral. It can also be a case whereby your department can engage the Ministry of Public Service, and we will make contact with network services so that assistance can be provided. Because sometimes, because persons are in the workplace or are in their homes and so on, so another individual may notice something that's not quite right going on with that individual. So they can take it upon themselves then and reach out to us here in the Ministry of the Public Service, or they can also reach out to network services as well. So there are different ways in which the sessions, the counseling sessions, the employee assistance can be offered.
Thanks for sharing that. Anyone else? Any more comments, questions? And you can see here that there's a wealth of information and knowledge even in your space in the public service. So it is not everything that, you know, we might be able to answer as a subcommittee. Sometimes you have the ministry responsible for the HR management side of things, the Ministry of Public Service there to provide that support. And sometimes it's just about asking a question and getting that information can also support, you know, if you're in the private sector. I know that we have, I believe, private sector employees here. You can reach out to us. We are also there for you to help and support in your journey for implementation. Let me see, any more questions? Probably got a few minutes, and then we can close off. I also believe children of the public sector workers benefit from the EAP as well.
Yes, Dr. Devenish, yes, children as well as family members, they can also access the service. via the public service employee, you see? So if I'm experiencing an issue, then my daughter, she will be able to benefit with counseling. Or if you have another family member that that person will be able to benefit from that program.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Excellent. We have a question in the chat from Hazel. Is the website information available as yet? No, the website has not yet been launched. We are planning to launch that website the middle of March. Can't remember the date, if it's the 14th or 15th. Rhonda can help me.
Thank you.
When that is,
The end of March. The end
sorry,
of
the end of March. So yes, so she's always my great corrector. Yeah, so the end of March, I think. So, and here's the thing, when it's launched, I think everybody will know about it because it would be on the news. Because I think Rhonda, we're gonna get as much media coverage,
If we can, yes.
yeah, as we can, yeah. And yes, it does extend to the statutory state-owned entities. Vanessa, this is a national policy, so no, there was a slogan years ago for education: no child left behind, no organization left behind. Yeah. CSO as well, but Nicole. All types of organizations, even self-employed people, because we forget to, as I said, I started with the definition that the workplace is no longer the traditional office setting, so a self-employed person working at home on a computer is within the environment of work. I think Vanessa was trying to get a point of clarification from Susan.
She said she's referring that the employee assistance program for government. So Ms. Seeley can clarify.
Can you repeat the question, please? Sorry about that.
All right. It was basically if the EAP program is extended to SOEs. It's not extended to civil society, but F is extended to state-owned enterprises as well.
With some entities, they would fall under whether they were non-commercial or commercial. So let's say an instance, well, previously before BRA became a board, the entities that would have fallen under that falls under BRA, they would obviously be mainstream public servants. But we still do, and so because if the organization is one that, let's say, brings in money, they earn revenue, yeah. So they would have been initially when the program was conceptualized back in the 90s, then they would have developed let's say choices whereby if the entity was non-commercial or commercial, so the assistance was based on whether the entity would have been able to pay for the employees to receive the counseling, or if those persons or if that entity was not in a position because they're not in a revenue, let's say a revenue creating enterprise. But that list was, I think it needs upgrading now because obviously that list would have been from since, as I said, the implementation of the program back in the late 90s, which would be like 1998, and some years following that. So I hope that helps some persons. It would just be a matter of if there are any organizations, state or enterprises out there, and they wish to contact me, then I will be able to offer some assistance in that way. I hope that helps.
Yeah, she said,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you, Ms.
Okay.
Seeley. Yeah, and just for point of clarification for everyone here, the conversation was about the EAP within the public service and its application to state-owned organizations. But in the conversation of the National Workplace Wellness Policy, which is pretty much adjacent to that, that's a much broader initiative from the Ministry of Labor. It applies to all entities in terms of the work that we do. Okay, all right. Yes, Joelle, I'm seeing your point here about considering placing the policy in secondary schools for guidance counselors. I think that's something that I think Rhonda we can look at. I mean, it is a workplace wellness policy, and schools are workplaces in themselves. So not only students would benefit, but teachers, non-teaching staff at the schools would benefit, school meals, workers, and those types. And of course, and I know that your point comes also from the standpoint that those leaving secondary school are likely to enter the labor market. Okay. And as a result, it is a good preparatory exercise to have it in the schools, especially secondary schools, for those people now leaving and they may not want to go to university. They may want to go straight into the job market. Okay. Yeah.
We can reach out to, well, join our planning. We can
Yeah,
look at
join the
reaching out to
planning. We can
Ministry of
consider that.
Education. Yeah.
That's fine. All right. I think we're good.
Yeah.
I agree. Thank you.
Mhm.
So over to you, Rhonda.
So it's 20 minutes past the hour of 12. It's 20 minutes past the hour of 12. But I just want to say thanks to all of you who have participated. We still have 100 or so persons online with us, which is very good. So thank you very much. A special thank you, Professor Devonish, for this presentation. It's always willing and available. So we will be, I know Professor Devonish was saying before the end of the day, hopefully before the end of the week, definitely we will have that. I'm saying a happy Ash Wednesday, blessed Ash Wednesday to all of you, those who are participating in services. And as we go through the Lenten season, may it be a blessed one to all of you. So once again, thank you. We look forward, in addition to what we'll be sending out to will be evaluation forms, so we get some feedback from you as to the type of activities and initiatives that you will want to see coming from us, from the committee, as we go forward. Professor Devonish spoke extensively about the work that was done and what we are planning to do, so we look forward to that feedback from you. So you should be able to, you would receive that information definitely before the end of the week, hopefully by tomorrow from us. And before the end of the month, you would have the information on the launch of the website. There's also social media platforms, the Instagram, which is Workplace Wellness BB, so you can check on there as well, and also our Facebook page. So we look forward to the feedback from you. So thank you very much. I'm seeing some suggestions in the chat already. So please remember to place, yes. And you can see the Instagram page. Professor Devonish has put it there in the chat as well. Workplace Wellness BB. All right, suggestions for dealing with mental health and work-related stress. So we will look forward to having some more webinars. You can say if this 2-hour session worked well for you, once we give the feedback as well. If that is well, or if you want an hour session, let us know. And we would plan our activities and so on to suit. So thank you very much for being such active and willing participants. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Rhonda for organizing and hosting this. Thank you.
You're almost welcome.
Thanks to the participants for making the time out to come out. Yes. All right.
All right.